Mesdames et messieurs,
The greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
this is gonna be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! Go! Oh!
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. Each week we share stories from athletes and people behind the scenes to help you have more fun watching the games. I'm your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
I haven't gotten to say this in almost 2 years, or actually over 2 years. It's a magical hour of vacuuming. Got some vacuuming going on, some construction, so
Some good high-powered shop vac.
oh my goodness. They're not nearly as nice as our Chinese women, but they are lovely. I will get them some cookies, as we did in China.
Oh, it's nice to go back to those days. I am very curious as to what surprises await us in Paris.
The magical hour of croissants.
Oh,
Or champagne corks popping.
somehow I don't think they're going to be like doing that in the media room for us.
I bet they will.
We shall see. Ooh la la. One quick correction from last week's show on blind soccer with Molly Quinn. Molly Quinn joined the USABA in 2020, not 2000, as we stated last week. So we apologize for that correction. And moving on to today's show, today we are talking with Johanna Garton, author of the new book All in Stride, which is about two runners, Elvin Kibet and Shadrack Kipchirchir, who left Kenya to pursue the American dream, become professional runners, and hopefully realize their goal of competing in the Olympics. Also featured in the book is TKFLASTAN Samantha Schultz, who becomes friends with Elvin through the Army's world-class athlete program, and she gets to know Johanna as well and opens up to her about her struggles with body image and disordered eating. Johanna herself is a runner who competed for Syracuse University, and she has since become a marathoner who's completed over 20 marathons, including 5 Boston marathons, which we're getting close to Patriots Day. Johanna is now a sports writer and high school cross-country coach in Denver. All in Stride is her third book. We talked with Johanna about the book and why these stories of these athletes are important to share. Take a listen. Johanna Garton, thank you so much for joining us. Your new book, All in Stride, looks at the Army's world-class athlete program. How did you get involved in wanting to tell that story?
Oh my gosh. Well, that's always a story in and of itself, right? Why an author decides to fall down a rabbit hole. And for me, I love writing about sports. I'm a sports writer based in Denver. And after my last book, which was about mountain climbing, a female mountain climber, I was looking for another story. And I've been a runner all my life. And as I said, I live in Denver. And I sort of heard through the grapevine about this program that's part of the U.S. Army called the World Class Athlete Program. And the distance running component of that program is based in Colorado Springs. And I just thought it was this fascinating story. I had never heard of this program. And I live in Denver. I'm a runner. I was like, I can't believe I don't know about this program. So I went down to Colorado Springs and watched one of their workouts and kind of inquired a little bit more about what the program entailed and met some of the runners in the program. And it just sort of snowballed from there.
In it, we talk about 3 different athletes, 2 distance runners and a modern pentathlete who coincidentally has been on our show before. We do know Samantha and are excited to see her profiled here. But we're talking about distance runners Elvin Kibet and Shadrack Kipchirchir. What drew you to their story in particular?
Well, I just felt like their journey was kind of a combination of all of these things that I think are just such juicy, interesting topics to dive into. Both of them were born in Kenya and came to the United States on distance running scholarships for university. And then after they graduated, decided to make a life here in the United States. And both have done so as professional distance runners. And they've also come through this Army program. So they're both soldiers. Shadrack is no longer serving the Army, so he's a vet. But it was just this really interesting combination of immigration and distance running and the military, and the stories of both Sammy and Elvin in particular, women who are in high performance endurance sports. I just love that whole topic, and I wanted to dive into that as well. So when I met Shadrack, he was the first athlete I met, and he started telling me his story. I was just totally sucked in. And then I learned that he was actually married to Elvin. And so the fact that there was also a love story in the middle of all of this, it was just that sealed the deal for sure.
How were they in wanting to share their story?
Well, I would say they were pretty good. It's interesting when you have a writer or a journalist kind of drop out of nowhere and start asking you questions and then sort of announce, this would make a really good book. Do you have any interest in that? And they say, sure, maybe. It takes a while to get people to warm up, to be able to start talking to their friends. And so it's a slow process of kind of walking through what it would entail, and that this isn't something that can happen in 6 months, but that it's going to be a long-term relationship that will take many years. And so cultivating those relationships with your subjects is something that takes time. But I got there with all three of them, luckily, and they ended up being great. And so having their story in the pages of a book now, I think, is really rewarding for all three of them.
How long did it take to not just to cultivate the relationships, but also write the book?
Yeah, I think from the time I started talking to Shadrack and Elvin, from beginning to, if we call the end now with the book about to be published, about 3 years. And that's actually pretty quick, I think, in the book publishing world.
In the middle of COVID, too.
Right.
How did that affect the project?
Yeah. So I started in the spring of 2021. And so if we sort of think back to where we all were at that point, it was a really fascinating time because they were all just kind of getting ready for the Tokyo Olympics or preparing to try out, and the US track and field trials is what Shadrack and Elvin were going for in order to get on that Olympic team and go to Tokyo. Sammy had already secured her spot. So it was definitely interesting and a little bit of a juggle to try to do the interviews and then maintain their athletic schedules and their trainings. I wanted to be really cognizant of that. And we were all sort of dealing with each other at a distance as well. So it took a little longer, I think, to kind of get going. But then it was really beautiful because Sammy, went on to Tokyo, and I was able to watch her through that whole journey. And with Elvin ended up running the track and field trials that summer. And so I was able to kind of understand what that process involved for her. So it was a really interesting sneak peek into being a part of an Olympic Games, which was really rewarding.
So let's talk about the World Class Athlete program a little bit, because we've spoken to Sammy, we've spoken to a few other soldier athletes. What did you learn about it? How did that, because you were coming at it totally blind. Right.
Yeah, it's just, it's this really interesting program that I don't think people know a lot about or know about at all. And I have to say, they don't do a very good job of sort of publicizing themselves. So that was kind of the impetus for writing the book, that I wanted to write about that program. And then as these things go, it ended up being more a story about these three athletes, with the World Class Athlete program just being a component of their journey. But it's a really incredible program that was started many decades ago to train soldiers to essentially become world-class Olympic athletes. And there are a lot of different disciplines and different sports, as you know, that are recognized in that program. And so soldiers who come in and who have training in riflery or distance running, or there's a big wrestling component of that program, they all come in, do their basic training. And then if they meet sort of certain qualifications in terms of what their sport requires, they can enter this unit. And the unit is essentially an athletic pursuit, much like I compare it to like the Army Band, for example. Those soldiers come in, they do their training, they have to maintain military standards, but their job is to perform. And so that is actually what this unit does. And so they train year round, full time, in addition to maintaining some very basic military standards, because at any time their athleticism could dip below the standard. And then at that point, they'd be transferred into the Army, into a regular unit. So I think people sort of imagine that they're just, athletes through and through all day long, but really all of the athletes very much see themselves as soldiers first. So I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to dive into that.
Why does the Army believe it's important to have a program like this? I mean, also like the band, you mentioned the band. Why should they have an athlete program?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? I think the Army is pretty progressive in that they recognize their soldiers come in all different shapes and sizes and backgrounds. And I think they want to honor those backgrounds and be able to create lives for soldiers beyond their military service. So I think that's probably the main reason. And then I think in terms of the World Class Athlete Program, they want their soldiers to be seen on the world stage and spreading goodwill. So there's definitely a sense of patriotism that goes beyond just being a soldier, showing up in your fatigues and fighting.
What is that like then? Did you learn from Elvin and Shadrack because they come from another country and they decided to join the Army partially because it was an opportunity to train, but coming in as immigrants and then becoming citizens?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is just the part that I think is fabulous, that I just love, because they both came through the American educational system at the university level, which a lot of immigrants do. We recruit especially distance runners from all parts of the world, in particular East Africa, because they're known for their distance running. And so, a lot of times when students graduate, I'm talking about East Africans in particular, Kenyans in particular, they opt to go back to Kenya. They've done their 4 years in the United States, but they prefer to have a life in Kenya. And so they leave. But I think both Shaddy and Elvin really fell in love with the United States and wanted to create lives here. They also both very much felt like they owed the United States something for giving them the opportunity to come here and to study. So they both ended up joining the Army because they felt compelled to serve. At the time that Shadrack joined the Army, he wasn't really even aware that there was this running program. He just joined, he did his basic training, and then somewhere in the course of becoming a soldier, he heard about this program. The distance running program was kind of just seeing a resurgence at that time. And so he heard about it and thought, well, if I can make the 10,000 meter time and make that qualifying time, then maybe actually I can continue my running and be a soldier. And so it was really kind of killing two birds with one stone. And then, of course, the benefit was when they joined the Army, they were both sort of fast-tracked to citizenship. So they got their citizenship relatively quickly. And so now they're both American citizens, which was a real bonus for them.
How difficult are those standards that they have to maintain speed-wise? You're a runner, and we aren't, so we don't understand, you read it on a piece of paper, and you're like, oh, we have to meet standards, and these are elite athletes anyway, so this should be no big deal, right? But how difficult is that?
Oh my gosh, so difficult. So difficult. In fact, I think they would both say the distance running standards to get into that program are probably a little too difficult, but they both were able to achieve the standards, though it was quite challenging. And there's a scene in the book of the race that Shadrack goes to try to achieve this standard in order to make that unit. And he falls short by about 6 seconds. I think he runs the 5,000 maybe, and it's about 6 seconds short. And so he begs his coach to be able to go run a meet like 2 weeks later and try again, just one more chance, coach. And his coach really sort of hesitates and then says, I'm going to take a chance on you, because Shadrack is practically in tears. This is the way that he wants to get into the Army and get into the unit, and sort of he sees this path ahead for himself, and he actually ends up qualifying in the 10,000 meters by a hair. So very challenging, at least for the distance runners.
Did you find that there was any conflict between that service in the Army and their training?
I think particularly challenging to be able to do both of those things. And I think because this particular unit is not well known, even within the Army, I think a lot of times there was, and there could be, and there is, an insecurity among soldiers in that unit about, are they serving at the level of their fellow soldiers? What really is their responsibility. So I think that's always sort of a push-pull, though they do see themselves as soldiers first. I think from time to time they run into other soldiers who are like, well, wait a second. Like, we're doing A, B, and C, but you're out here and all you're doing is running, not really knowing what it takes to be a professional runner, which is quite a task in and of itself. But I think that is kind of a rub that comes up quite often for them, for sure.
What are their duties besides training full time? What other kinds of training do they have to do as soldiers?
I think they have to maintain all sorts of training in terms of like military formations and riflery, and they go through monthly checkups to make sure their uniforms are fitting. They have to go through all sorts of physical fitness tests, which for them are actually not so hard to achieve because they're already in great shape. And then another component that's part of their military service is actually traveling a fair amount out to other military bases and talking to other soldiers about the program, as well as going into the community and talking to potential recruits, because I think they're always looking for more soldiers to come in and maybe enter the unit. So there's a big sort of public relations effort on a small scale, which is very much geared towards increasing the capacity of the military to have soldiers serving in this unit.
There is a love story in here, which is great. But when you're in the military, that can be a little tricky. So talk a little bit about their relationship and how that works with training and the military and all these different components of their very complicated lives.
Yeah. So the really interesting thing about how they chose to serve is Shadrack came in, I think it was 2014 when he joined, and he did basic training. And he came in, it was a typical sort of 4-year contract. So he came in, and Elvin was a year behind him in university. So after they sort of did a long distance thing for about a year, got married at the end of her studies, and then she transferred out to Portland, where he was in training to try to make the 2016 Rio team. And she kept running. So they were there together for a while he was serving, kind of going back and forth to Colorado. We have Fort Carson as the military base here that serves the Army in Colorado. So he was coming back and forth to sort of do his military service. And he did end up making the 2016 team, which we might talk about in a little bit. But he went on to conclude his time with the Army in 2018. He fulfilled that 4-year contract. And at that point, he was such a superstar that he was being approached by sponsors, and he was given an opportunity to run as a Nike athlete, and then had to make the decision, do I stay in the Army or do I take my chances and take this contract with Nike? And so at that point, he decided to leave the Army and take the contract with Nike. And at that point, Elvin was very much struggling with like, where was she going to go with her career? Her athletic career hadn't taken off quite like his, but she had seen the benefits that he had gained from being in the Army. So just as he was leaving the Army, she joined. So there was never a time where both of them were serving. He sort of led the way and she joined after him. And so, yeah, it was really interesting to see kind of the very minimal overlap that they had with that. I think that made things easier, though, for sure.
One of the things that I found very interesting in the book was discussing Elvin's struggles and also Sammy's struggles with the lack of women in this program, and what it was going from, for Elvin, going from a college where you had a strong team around you to being the only one.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for her, and how has that evolved as she's been in the Army?
I would say, in a word, for both of them, lonely, very lonely. I mean, I think Sammy had a few other women in her unit who were pentathletes, but those relationships, I don't know that they were particularly strong. It can be a little cutthroat sometimes. I think it can go one of two ways with women at this level. You can either bond and have great, fantastic, supportive relationships with your teammates, or you can know that you're all competing for the same 2 or 3 Olympic spots, and you can really start to butt heads. And I think that's actually what Sammy experienced. And that was really hard for her and made things very lonely. I think Elvin as well, For most of the time that she's been in the unit, she has been the only woman in that unit. So she's been training almost exclusively with men who she loves, who are very dear. And actually, they really have taken her under their wing, which is wonderful. A lot of them are also Kenyan. So they have sort of simpatico in terms of cultural background and transition to the United States as well. So that's been helpful for Elvin, but she has definitely talked about a sense of isolation and wanting to have more women in that program. A few more women have definitely entered in the past year or two who she's been able to train with, but she frequently brings people over from East Africa or brings in other women from the community who are excellent runners just to run with her so that she has that component and can lean on some other females in terms of their running.
Yeah, what is that difference? Because you can go from one angle and go, well, what's the big deal? But there is a big deal to it. So get into that, and also if we could talk a little bit about women's bodies and how they're
Mm-hmm.
different and how that makes a difference also in this program.
Yeah. So your question is more like how the training is different for men
Mhm.
and women?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then that really does get into the female anatomy and what we go through hormonally throughout all these different periods in our lives. Her coach is pretty good about trying to tailor her workouts, so that they're not identical to the men. But ultimately, a lot of times she is just doing sort of a reduced workload. She's doing what the men are doing, but a little bit less. And sometimes that works. But as we know, like women's bodies shift and go through all sorts of changes within the course of a month. So I think it's definitely been a learning process for the coach to understand. There are times when Elvin can't really do the 20-mile long run that the men are doing, and she can't really do it just at a slower pace. It has to be like a day next week when she's feeling a little bit better. So that's been for sure an ongoing educational process with her teammates and with her coaches, all of whom are male. Then the other component that's been really fascinating to watch is that Elvin got pregnant about 2 years ago and had a baby. And so the whole process of her body changing and adapting and going through childbirth, her childbirth was incredibly stressful and it took quite a long time to recover. And that as well has been very similar to sort of watch the dynamics of having her go from giving birth and then getting back into not just exercise, but running professionally long distance has been super challenging. And to watch her coach sort of try to navigate that and use the right language, it's been a journey for sure. And she's had to bring on, I would say, other resources in terms of doctors and physical therapists to help her have those conversations about, I'm not ready. I can't run that half marathon next month. It's going to take me 6 more months to kind of get back to where I was. And even then, my body might not be quite the same. So very challenging for her coaches, her teammates, and also for her, because meanwhile, she's seeing a lot of other women who are coming back into the sport after childbirth, who are taking completely different paths, sometimes very quickly. And so I think that's been really hard for her, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say that was one of the things you mentioned in the book is the frustration at seeing other people just supposedly bounce back
Mm-hmm.
and not having that.
And
Yeah.
she's in two extremely male-dominated communities, the military and elite long-distance running, which has not necessarily been so open to women, never mind women going through childbirth.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, she's got a couple of things that have always felt to her like uphill battles, and sort of has said to me a few times, like, I don't know why, like, why is this my cross to bear, to be the one who's always the first here, the one who has to educate? It's been frustrating for her, but I think she's done a pretty good job. And I think very much sees her role in the future as continuing to sort of pave the way for others behind her, and definitely sees her role in this book in that regard as well. So I think she's excited to go out there and talk about the struggles she's had, and Sammy as well, because it has not been butterflies and roses by any mean. This Olympic dream it's fraught. It comes with a lot of dips and a lot of sacrifices for both of them and for all of the athletes who end up on the Olympic teams.
In meeting Sammy, why did you want to include such a different sport into this tale?
I'm a runner, so I felt really comfortable with the running component. But along the way, somebody said, "Oh my gosh, you really have to talk to Sammy Schultz because she's had a really magnificent journey as well. And it would be good to get a different perspective. You're going to have this story that's immigration based and has all sorts of cultural components that you can dive into. But it would be nice to also compare it with a much more traditional American girl grows up on a soccer field and then goes to the Olympics by the time she's 30. That kind of story would also be fun. And it would be fun to have sort of a juxtaposition. So I did start talking to Sammy, and Sammy and Elvin are friends through being in this unit. And so it was something that was interesting to me to learn about that sport. It's a sport I don't think a lot of people know a lot about. So just from a journalist point of view, I love to kind of dig into that. And then I always find it really fascinating to weave people's stories together, and found ways to do that with the two of them, because even though they come from completely different backgrounds, they have had experiences that are very similar. And I loved kind of being able to show that to the reader.
You get into some very complicated things with Sammy, and you really started this process right when she was going to Tokyo. And yet where she is now is so very different. So just talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how your communication with her changed and how she changed and how she was talking about her story.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This was so compelling and so unexpected because I did start talking with her either right before Tokyo or right after. And she's much more guarded, I think, than Elvin and Shadrack. So it took a little bit longer to kind of get her to open up. And, we talked about her childhood, which I definitely include, which has had some highs and lows and some really crappy coaching. So that I saw that in our early conversations, but it took 6 months or so for her to kind of open up, and also for her to begin unpeeling the layers of what she had gone through in the past 10 years and coming back from Tokyo and having a moment to breathe and reflect. It was apparent that she was struggling and had been for many years with disordered eating. And so it took quite a while into our conversations for her to recognize that herself and then to be able to share that with me. And so just as I was starting to write her part of the story, all of a sudden the story changed. So we had to go back and have more conversations and dig even deeper to that. And then I sort of kicked the can down the road on writing her piece of the story so that she could actually seek help and go into a treatment center, which she did and spent many months there. And her recovery from disordered eating is ongoing and will be lifelong. And we had very frank conversations about the importance of including that part of her story in the book. And at the end of the day, she really did want that included and saw that very much as her contribution to the story. And I think she very much hopes that it will open up conversations, because if you can have an Olympic athlete who comes to you and to the community and says, look, this is a struggle even for me, I think that's going to help a lot of women and girls who are going through the same thing.
Do you think the lack of understanding among coaches in dealing with women athletes is a problem I mean, because we keep hearing stories
Mhm.
of runners who are overtrained and underfed. And where is that coming from what you've learned?
Yeah, we're hearing more and more about it, which I think is good. I think probably the root of the problem is a lack of sports science around women and girls in sport. I think it's something like only 6% of sports science studies women and girls. So when we have a lot of sports science that is focused on men and boys, you're totally missing half the population. And so in terms of developing training and talking about nutrition, all of that conversation until very recently has been focused on male bodies. So I think it's not going to be until we get more of that and the dissemination of that information to athletes, coaches, parents, teammates, that we're finally going to start to see more of a shift. And I do think it's coming. I mean, as you both know, there have been some incredible books recently by and about female athletes. The Lauren Fleshman book, Good for a Girl, is one example. Christine Yu's book, Up to Speed, the sports science around women athletes, has been a really powerful voice in that field. So yeah, I think education, science, and then the dissemination of all of that to these important people, I think is probably what it's going to take. And it'll take some time for sure, for sure.
What about a shifting in attitudes as well on the coaching level? Because one of the things I noticed throughout the book is sprinkled these moments of coaches who talk about, like, this is what your body is supposed to look like, and that's a recurring theme, even though it's just inserted here and there. And
Hmm.
with Elvin and Shadrack, they seem more healthy in how they approach their care of their bodies and how they fuel them. And with Sammy's case, just it went a different direction. How do
Yeah.
you see the attitudes changing when we've had just decades and decades of this kind of
Yes.
mentality?
Yeah, and it really has been perpetuated for so many decades. I mean, I remember being a girl in sport in the like late 70s, 80s, and I honestly really don't remember this being a thing. I think it's kind of come about in the 80s, 90s, and onward as Title IX allowed more women to get into sport. And I think initially women were just so damn happy to be there. They just competed and their bodies were their bodies, and we didn't really think about it. And it's only through, the things that you can imagine, mass media, social media, all of that stuff, all of this imagery, that I think we've gotten to this point. And I do think it's a very American situation and a very American challenge. I mean, I know it happens all over the world, but one of the things I wanted to show was how surprising it was for Elvin to come into a collegiate system and all of a sudden see this disordered eating all around her. Like, she literally didn't really understand what it was because she had come from a culture where she rarely had enough food to eat. So when she came to the United States and she was at the college dining center, she was eating whatever she could and was able to maintain a really healthy career all the way through because she got enough nutrients in those really formative years. So showing that kind of cultural divide, I think, was really important. And in terms of change, I think the thing I talked about earlier, just more education, more women and girls showing up and talking about this and having those conversations, definitely more women coaches at the middle school and high school and collegiate level, I think is going to help tremendously, tremendously as well.
Now, talking a little bit about that cultural divide and that transition from them coming here, I was wondering if they talked at all about their relationship with Kenyan runners now. Like, is there, I don't want to say animosity, but what's the relationship between Kenyan American runners and the Kenyan runners?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever asked them that specifically. I was able to go over to Kenya, and I spent about a month in Kenya with Shadrack when he was in one of these training blocks for a marathon. So I was able to sort of see how he integrated into, essentially what was his community. And I wouldn't say that there's any animosity. And a lot of, as I talked about, a lot of Kenyan runners who come over for university do make the conscious choice to go back because they just prefer life in Kenya. There is definitely a sense that he has struck it rich and hit gold and was lucky. And certainly I think luck plays into it, but he has worked very hard to get where he is. And I think just saying it's all luck and genetics would be really discounting how hard he's worked. When he goes back, and when other elite Kenyan-born American athletes go back to Kenya, they do sort of get surrounded and people think that they have tons and tons of money, which relatively speaking, they do. So there are a lot of asks that they get when they go back in terms of money and resources. And can you bring me shoes? And I need Gatorade. And can you bring me this and that? I think that can be a little bit tiring, but I think they also both sort of see like that's kind of the price we pay for deciding to leave our home country and go elsewhere.
Okay, so you were in Kenya. You live at altitude already. What was the altitude like for you?
Let's
there?
see, I do. I live in Denver, which is 5,200, and I was in E10, which I believe is more like 7,000 feet. So it's a little bit higher than Denver. And that's where most of the heavy training, that area of Kenya, up in E10 and Eldoret, is kind of where the distance runners congregate.
What kind of differences do you notice just in yourself as you transferred to that higher altitude?
It took me a couple days to adjust, probably not nearly as long as it would had I been coming from sea level. So I adjusted pretty quickly. And yet, still, as both of you know, when you go out for a run and you're at 7 or 8 or 9,000 feet, you're definitely huffing and puffing. So my runs were definitely huffing and puffing, and the footing was not great. You know, the roads are terrible, and they're all of these lovely running trails, but they're covered with this red dirt and these big rocks. And so the footing was tricky. And so I would always go out with a guide to make sure that I was going the right direction, that I wasn't totally falling and twisting my ankle. So it was challenging, even for me, being a seasoned runner who lives at altitude. It was an adjustment.
I'm curious about the stereotype because
Mhm.
the idea of Kenyan especially, but just East African runners in general have this stereotype of they're just really good and better than
Mhm.
everybody else. And what they think of that themselves.
I think they think that that is dismissing all of their hard work and efforts and all the other things they've done to be able to accomplish what they have. Certainly there is a genetic component, but just as in the United States, we're all different. We all have different bodies. We're, good at different things. It's possible that there's a little bit of a genetic advantage for some of them, but there are plenty of Kenyans who are not runners. So I think they get a kick out of it, and it feels a little dismissive to them, in particular because, they both came to the United States in their late teens, and they had in both cases, they had only done competitive running for less than 6 months in Kenya, and then they came to the United States. So 99% of their competitive running has occurred in the United States. Now, granted, both of them did run back and forth to school every year for many years. So they did have a base, but most of their developed running has happened in the United States. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's off-putting, but they're definitely used to that perception that they're just born genetically gifted and any Kenyan can, step onto an Olympic team.
I want to talk a little bit about the writing process. This is creative nonfiction, and so it's very much like a story with dialogue. Why did you choose to write in this style?
That's how I've written my other two books. And I just feel like I personally, as a reader, love to read something that sounds like fiction, but is totally true. I think that makes a book so much more compelling when you can fall into the characters and the dialogue and then finish the chapter and think, oh my gosh, that was so good. And also, that's actually a true story. I love that combination of journalism and being allowed to use a little bit of creative license in writing and in storytelling. So, yeah, that's the short answer.
How did you end up organizing all of because it's a lot of interviews and then you're basing dialogue off of interviews.
Mhm.
So how many interviews did you end up doing, and then how did we organize all of this stuff?
Are you asking because you're going to write a book just like this at some point, Jill?
You never know. Never say never.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I ended up doing maybe 30 interviews, 30 to 40 interviews. And I just sort of take copious notes all the way along, and I'll kind of go back over my notes at the end of the day and I'll color code things. And eventually, towards the end of my interview process, I will have sort of an outline in my head. I mean, I end up many nights in those early stages kind of laying in bed with all these images kind of floating above my head, and I'm trying to organize it before I wake up in the morning. And usually I have some semblance of an outline by the morning, and I'll tweak that throughout the next few weeks. And then just kind of go back and plug in pieces. So in this case, I very much wanted to have a timeline for Shadrack and a timeline for Elvin and one for Sammy. So I believe what I ended up doing was writing each of those individual stories in a vacuum and then going back and figuring out how to weave them together and seeing where the overlaps were. it's a process for sure. Tricky.
How did you know where to stop?
That's a good question too. In terms of the writing or in terms of the interviewing?
In terms of the storytelling, first off, but I mean, yeah, when do you know you've had enough?
Yeah. So I think in this case, because these three individuals are still alive, I could have kept going forever.
Yeah.
But I did get to the point where I realized, oh my gosh, I have a deadline. And so I think this is where I'm going to stop. And it made a lot of sense for me to stop literally at the point with the three of them where I had to start writing. So I stopped talking to them and started writing. And then the writing took about 4 to 5 months. And in that 4 to 5 months, there were actually more things that came up that I then had to go back and integrate. And by the time I handed over the manuscript to my editor, I was like, well, this is what I've got today. But in a year from now, when it's published, there'll be even more. And I was kind of fretting about that. And she said, well, you've decided to write about people who are alive. So that's just how life goes. And all of that material and the things that have happened since then are just going to be fantastic things for you to talk about when the book is released. And so that's how it's played out.
So what are some of those things?
Let's see. So as I mentioned, Elvin and Shadrack have had a baby. And I think the book ends with their son being about a year old, a year and a half, and he's now about to turn 2. So her journey and her comeback to running has gone on since the conclusion of the book. And Shadrack as well, he has made the leap to marathoning, and that's happened since the end of the book. So both Shadrack and Elvin just recently competed at the 2024 U.S. Marathon Olympic track trials in Orlando. And they were one of the very few, I don't think they were the only, but one of the very few married couples that did that. And so that's happened within the past couple of months. And their running careers have continued. I think his will continue in marathoning. I do think Elvin's kind of at the point where her running career is finishing. She's interested in going on to become a nurse practitioner. So she's going to be starting nursing school in the fall. And in terms of Sammy, she has gone through, as I mentioned, 4 months of treatment for disordered eating, very intense inpatient treatment. And so is out of that now and is continuing her journey in recovery and sort of starting to look at what her career is going to look like. And so that was interesting to be able to talk to Sammy about whether she'd be comfortable so soon after the end of her treatment entered being out on the circuit talking about that journey. And luckily, I think she's looking forward to that.
I have a quick question about Nike because Shadrack was a Nike athlete. There's been a lot of stories coming out of the Nike camp. I know he was not there a terribly long time, but what did he have to say about that system?
Yeah, he has very positive memories from his time at Nike. He was Oz trained by somebody completely different and was not sort of part of the unraveling of that Nike system in terms of the distance running component. So his memories have always been very positive. He was with Nike for about, I want to say 2 or 3 years. And his Nike contract, that's actually, I think, something that maybe happened at the end of the book, that his Nike contract ended and he was picked up by Puma. So now he's a Puma athlete. And so that was really fascinating. The moment at his house where he had to pack up, I wasn't there, but I heard about it. He had to sort of pack up all the Nike gear and like move it out and bring it to the donation center and then make room for all the Puma gear coming in was really, really quite funny.
When an athlete has to weigh a contract from a shoe company versus staying in the Army, how much of a difference is that contract to them?
Yeah. I don't think that was an easy decision for him because he very much recognized at this point at which he could have chosen Nike or Army, he very much realized that his running career will not go on forever. You know, he's only going to be running another few years, he realized at that point. And now it's actually been many years. So he's gone the distance, so to speak, no pun intended. But I think he wanted to give it a chance and so loves running. So I think for him, that was the tipping point. He so loves running and is so passionate about running that he very much wanted to continue that as long as he possibly could. And I don't know that he thought he'd be able to do that as well as he could if he stayed in the military, because there is this other component, because they do have to maintain these standards and go through training and fly all over the country talking about the program. And so he very much wanted to focus on running as intently as he could, as long as he could. But it really was a hard decision, because in the meantime, he gave up what could be a lifelong military career. And what many athletes in WCAP do end up doing is they finish their athletic career and they do stay in the Army and get transferred into a different unit. And they are in the Army for another, 20 years. So not an easy decision, I would say.
Has interviewing all these runners changed your running?
Oh, gosh. Yes, I would say that it has, because to be honest, it's been hard to watch all of these runners go through highs, but also those incredible dips and the emotional challenges that come with those dips, and sort of watching them ride that out. It's been very hard, because inevitably, most of them, they want to get back up to the top again. And that's possible, but for only so long. So there is an end to the athletic career. And I can see that, because I am a solid 20 years older than most of the people I've been talking about. So I'm in my early 50s. And I think the way that it's changed my running is that it's made me realize that that running and my contributions to running can be so much more than getting out there and pounding the pavement and finishing times and places. That my contribution to running and this space can be through coaching or through writing or through advocating. And so I think their experiences have changed me, because it's made me realize I'm here and there's so much more that can be done. And I hope that they find that too. I think most of them probably will.
Oh, I think that's a nice place to end it. Johanna, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with us.
You're welcome.
And this has been a fun read, and I hope our listeners find it a good read as well.
I hope so too. Thank you guys for having me on, and for having Sammy on a few years ago. Are you? And maybe again. Is she coming back?
She's coming back. We're excited. We're excited to talk to her. And Elvin is coming on as well.
Right,
so that's really cool too. Thank you so much, Johanna. You can learn more about her at johannagarton.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. Also, All in Stride comes out on April 2nd, 2024. So if you appreciated this interview and plan on purchasing a copy of the book, we ask that you please do so through our affiliate site at bookshop.org/shop/flamealivepod. We earn a commission off of any title purchased through that link, whether it's on one of our curated book lists or not. And that money goes towards covering our operating budget and bringing you the most fun coverage from Paris 2024.
As-tu une valise?
Oui. Speaking of the most fun coverage from Paris 2024, wow, we've got tons of news. Let's start with Torch and Flame. Got some more information about the Torch Relay, specifically the parade in Marseille. The Torch is going to arrive in France on May 8th. There's going to be a huge celebration. The Flame will come in by a 3-masted ship called the Belém, and that's coming across the Mediterranean from Greece to France. That will take several days for that journey to happen. And once it gets to Marseille, there's going to be a maritime parade. So boat owners in the region are invited to register for this and be part of it. And they hope that there's going to be several hundred boats escorting the Flame to the shore. It sounds really awesome. We'll have a link where you can register your boat if you happen to be in the area. And they're going to have more events that go on that day when the Torch comes. So we are going to keep our ears open for more details, and we'll share them with you when we have it.
Une valise de flamme.
WWD is reporting that Louis Vuitton has unveiled a customized trunk for the Olympic torch. This will have circular sockets in the base and lid to secure, protect, and display the torch. So you slide it in, you could put the trunk on the end, and voila, le torch. And the exterior is going to have LV's signature canvas in a checkered damier pattern, brass corners and closures. The interior will be black leather to avoid scratches on the torch's surface, and the lid will be embossed with the Paris 2024 logo.
It's sweet. It's a sweet little piece of luggage there.
It is. It's very, very classy, very beautiful. The torch looks so elegant in there. We'll try to get some pictures of that to show you. Otherwise, we'll link to the article. They've also made a giant metal trunk. Did you see this?
I did. It looks like one of those old steamer trunks from 100 years ago.
Right. If you were a cruiser and cruised on ships and you brought this giant trunk that kind of opened up into a mini closet, that's what this looks like. It's very tall. It's got a central section and two wings that open up and drawers for all of the metals. And they have a magnetized system inside every drawer to keep the metals in place during transport. What I did wonder about this is I guess you can keep all the metals together, but then they have to go their separate ways, especially the ones going over to Tahiti.
Well, this box holds somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500. I don't remember the exact number. But I'm wondering if there's multiples of those.
Good question. Because if they end up having a multiple winner, like if you have a tie for first and then you have 2 golds and a bronze, you need extra medals.
But remember that they're going to do all the medals in that plaza.
Oh, that's
So
right.
except for the Tahiti medals. So they're all going to be in that one spot.
That's right.
So
That
I
makes
think we'll be
sense.
okay. I wonder, this is what they did not say in the article, because there's always a box that the medal winners get for the individual boxes, and we have not seen one yet for Paris.
No. And when I started reading the article, I thought, yeah, that it was going to be an LV box too. And I got really excited.
I'm hoping that that's going to come out next, that all the medalists will get their own little Louis Vuitton box, as they should.
Right?
How French.
Louis Vuitton is also staging a temporary exhibition of its emblematic Maille Courrier alongside artifacts relating to sport at their workshops in Assenair. You can register online for a 30-minute guided visit. So we will hopefully get the right link to that in the show notes. It's a little hidden and there's a lot of 404 action going on with this website, but that would be also very, very cool to see. After the flame has been lit, we now have a home for the flame. I don't know if it's going to be an actual cauldron. I'm very worried we're going to have another snow flame situation.
I think we're going to be okay. The French are not going to do a snow flame.
Let's hope. But according to AFP, during the games, the flame will live and reside in the Tuileries garden. This is along the Seine with the Louvre on one side and the Place de la Concorde on the other. So it's going to be right in the center, heart of Paris, accessible for anybody to come and see it. It's going to be really cool.
Now, do we know if this is going to be a secondary location or is this the main location? Because that was unclear to me.
Also unclear to me, but it sounded like it was going to be the main because the ceremony's not in a stadium. There's no real first place where the torch or where the cauldron gets lit and then stays lit and stays there. We'll find out. Also, the volunteer uniforms have been released. I thought of you immediately when I saw this because of time and place.
It is time and place. And the best thing about these uniforms is, once again, so modern looking, so 2024, and so little French details in it.
So
And
tell
those
us about-
hats.
Yes. Oh my gosh, the hats.
Okay, so the design of the volunteers' uniforms is by Decathlon, and it took a year to conceive and design each piece of this unisex uniform. I think there are 15 items. One of the main pieces is a striped shirt in sort of a multi-tone teal, and it is emblematic of the Marnier, the sailor striped shirt. That sort of is that stereotypical French piece. And then it has pants and shorts and jackets. So you'll see all the volunteers in these wonderful teal outfits with these fantastic sort of floral sun bucket hats.
They're a little floppy, I will say, more so than a structured bucket, but they will hold the sun, keep the sun out. That's for sure, if they're worried about that.
They look very practical, but very stylish, which you would hope for French fashion, they would pull that off.
They will also be very 2024 because they really the teal and there's kind of a pinkish color in there that really reminded me of early 90s, late 80s.
The 90s are back, man.
I know it's going to be incredible. The IOC announced that the village is going to have a nursery with accommodations for athletes who are breastfeeding. So you can bring your kid and they have a place to stay and you don't have to worry so much.
Right. So the village will have a nursery because, in general, no children are allowed in the athletes' village. That runs into a problem when you have small children. So the nursery is an area where people can meet up with their children during daytime hours. But then they've also made this accommodation where athletes who are breastfeeding their children can stay in a hotel right next to the athletes' village. So they can actually stay in the room either with their partner and the child or just the child. Because obviously, if you're nursing, you can't nurse just in daytime hours. Doesn't work like that. So the idea being that they're trying to make accommodations because so many more athletes are parents now.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you think about the fact that back with amateurs, people didn't stay in sport very long because they had to go get jobs. And now that people can stay in sport longer and longer, obviously, if you're a woman, you only have so much time to have a child. And this is a nice way that the IOC has evolved to accommodate that.
You didn't think Zika was back on your 2024 Olympics bingo card, did you?
I know. I first saw this. I saw that you put a story in from the India Times, and I first saw it in Inside the Games. And Inside the Games, we don't really talk about them much anymore the way we used to because the original editors and founders sold the publication, and the quality is not as good as it was. So when I saw this, I thought, oh, this is somebody trying to cause a ruckus. But no, it's in other publications too.
No, and also it's the French trying to cause the ruckus. So apparently, the French have been dealing with the Asian tiger mosquito, which is a disease-carrying mosquito that has moved into Europe as a result of climate change. So it's been able to take root. It carries dengue, it carries yellow fever, it carries Zika, the return of Zika, and several other mosquito-borne illnesses. So they've tried fumigating, they've tried a lot of mitigation efforts, but they are still having this problem during their summers. So there will be monitoring and extensive attempts to wipe out mosquitoes during the Olympics and Paralympics.
Well, put that one back on your bingo card, everybody. We have some sponsorship news. Rachel Axon reported in the Sports Business Journal that Samsung, who is already a top sponsor for the IOC, signed some deals to do special support and sponsorship of surfing, skateboarding, and breaking competitions during the games. And these partnerships will include activations at key events in the lead up to Paris, and they want to spotlight the cultures of every sport. Now, activations seems to be a new buzzword within marketing. Have you seen this pop up a lot?
I have not. That's why I looked at you quite quizzitively.
Well, because I barely understand what that means too, but I think they're going to have different events, and saying an activation is kind of the fancy way of saying ideation. I have an idea, or we have to we have to ideate, come in with, big words. Big words make it seem more important. So that'll be interesting. That they didn't elaborate on what kind of things they're going to be doing, but that could be something else going on at the games and maybe something outside of a venue that you could take part in. Remember when we were doing some deep dives on track cycling, or I was going down rabbit holes in track cycling with Mandy Marquardt?
Yes, I do. I'm still wearing the helmet.
Italy is going to be using those fancy new bikes. We talked a little bit about the new bike shape that was going to be allowed, that was going to be incredibly fast. So Italy's got something called the Pinarello Bolide bike. It is 3D printed, and standout points include a humpback whale inspired arrow node pattern on the seat tube. So the tube of the seat where the tube of the bike where the seat sits on top of, that's got like a ridge design, not although on one side.
So I will not be the only thing that is inspired by a humpback whale at the Olympics this year.
The bike also featured a slimline bottom bracket and hubs. You can buy one of these of your own if you would like. The men's version is 29,000 euros and the women's version is 12,000 euros. 3D printing. That's what makes it expensive. And that is courtesy of Cycling Weekly. But I was very excited to see, like, oh, yes, we are going to see these new bike designs come out and be on the track. And then I'm going to watch 1984 coverage and then go, wow, look at what bikes used to look like.
Speaking of watching coverage.
Okay, so we talked about some of the Olympics is going to be in movie theaters this summer. Opening ceremonies on IMAX.
This is amazing. And such a great, simple idea to bring the breadth of this very different kind of opening ceremonies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To people who can't be there.
Yes. It's going to be cool. It will be on 150 screens across the US. So we will continue to monitor this to try to figure out where they are. But oh man, if we were home, I'd be at the movies for this. It's going to
I'd be
amazing.
all over that because then again, and we talked about this with the movie theater, it gives you that group experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fireworks are big and fireworks are cool when you're with other people.
Yes, definitely. I would bring my Kleenex or my puffs, depending. I just say, I bet I would cry through the whole thing. It's going to be cool. And we have more information about NBC streaming coverage on Peacock, including a first. They will have multi-screen action going on. I'm not sure if it's going to be every sport, but they will have something called Peacock Discovery Multi-View, which will allow you to watch 4 events at once. And you can pick which event is going to have audio, and then they're also going to have on-screen descriptions to help you understand what's important. So you're not just having one screen on focus and the other screen's on mute. You can also figure out what's going on or see key things pop up on the screen that'll help you track everything a little bit better.
So basically they're catching up to what a lot of our listeners have already been doing.
I know. And we've asked in the Facebook group, are you going to multi-screen the multi-screen?
The answer is yes.
So not sure if this is going to be available for all sports. They specifically called out soccer and athletics and wrestling, which this is prime for athletics, especially if they have multiple.
Yeah, you've got multiple events happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So you'll have a throwing event, a jumping event, and races going on. And, you know, one camera. So even when you're there, you don't necessarily know where to look.
Yeah.
Never mind where the camera actually points. So this way you can really, again, get that feeling of being there and choose what you want to see, putting the viewer more in control, which is what I think more viewers want. Just like we prefer watching streaming to the curated packages in prime time. This is, again, a move into that the viewer is in control of what he or she gets to see.
Exactly. For Peacock, you will also be able to search for coverage by sport and star athlete, whoever that may be deemed, and plan your viewing through an interactive scheduling feature. Basketball, golf, and soccer coverage is also going to have a catch up with key plays feature. So if you pop in the middle of a game, you'll be able to activate that and see highlights that have already happened in that match, which sounds kind of cool. They are testing their multi-view feature at other events this spring. So if you get Peacock, be on the lookout for it and, test it out and see how it works and let us know. You know, I love a good opening ceremonies food sponsorship.
We just like a good food sponsorship, period.
Right? So if you need food for your opening ceremonies party, the Australian food company Paddy's Food Group has become a partner of the Australian Olympic Committee. They make 4 and 20 meat pies and fitness outcomes ready meals. So the AOC now has an official pie. They have an official ready meal. And Obviously, they're in Australia, but you can get them in the US too. There's a beef and cheese version. There's a Philly cheesesteak version. I want to know if there's a Philly cheesesteak version in Australia, because that would be interesting to see what their interpretation is.
I kind of want to know if there's a 4 and 20 Blackbird version.
You might be able to find those. Not sure where, but you might be able to find them. In the US, you can get them at Rutter's, which is a convenience store chain in Pennsylvania, Moto Mart, which is in the Midwest, Easy Mart in Michigan, 7-Eleven Hawaii, the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, and at Walmart. I'm not sure which Walmarts, if all of them have it, but they're at Walmart. So if you find them, if you have them at your opening ceremonies party, let us know and let them know.
That's the wrong music for for this news coming.
We can't license that music.
I know, fair enough.
We have Olympic mascots for every games, but the IOC has signed a licensing deal with Warner Brothers for Looney Tunes Olympic products. And Looney Tunes themed products are going to be available internationally now through 2026. Also with that, 8 national Olympic committees have signed domestic deals for local team merch. These countries include the US, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Spain, and Mexico.
Do the Poles really love Daffy Duck?
They probably do. So you will be able to find Looney Tunes Olympic themed merch like pins, clothing, toys, sporting goods, candy. They've teamed up with Ferrara Pan Candy in the US. So looking forward to that. Accessories and more, and products will also be available in the WB shop. I don't know what you saw online about that, but I saw Michael Payne's reaction.
What did he say?
He was very confused. At why they would do this. This is not new. Back in 1996, there was a Looney Tunes deal as well around Atlanta, but we'll see how this goes. But he was surprised that you have mascots and then you license with another set of mascots. But people know the Looney Tunes. They don't know the Frege all that much. And the mascots tend to go away.
Right.
You know?
Daffy Duck is eternal. Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
It is the time of the show where we check in with our team Keep the Flame Alive. These are past guests and listeners of the show who make up our citizenship of our very own country, TKFLASTAN. We have a Paris qualification alert. Rower Christy Wagner and her teammate Sofia Vitas have been selected to compete in the Double Sculls event at Paris 2024. It will be Christy's second Olympics.
Bree Walker won gold at the final Monobob World Cup of the year in Lake Placid. This is Australia's first bobsleigh World Cup gold medal, and she finished the season ranked second overall.
So excited for her. Claire Egan was recognized by the International Biathlon Union for her work as chair of the IBU Athletes Commission, a position that she held for 6 years, and her term is now done and she's stepping down.
World Men's Curling Championships will start on March 30th and go through April 7th. Team Schuster will be representing the United States.
Jackie Wong was on NPR's Here and Now talking about Ilya Malinin. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
And we mentioned a couple of weeks ago about Keegan, the movie about Keegan Randall, and now that is available on YouTube.
So we will link to that in the show notes. Well, that is going to do it for this episode. If you read All in Stride, let us know what you think.
You can find us on X, Threads, and Instagram at FlameAlivePod. Send us an email at flamealivepod@gmail.com. Call or text us at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. You can chat with us and other fans on our Facebook group, Keep the Flame Alive Podcast, and sign up for our weekly newsletter with even more Olympic and Paralympic info. You can do that on our website, flamealivepod.com.
Oh, next week is going to be good. So the Cleveland International Film Festival is getting started, and we talk with the director of one of the movies. It's a documentary that will be shown at the film festival called Athletes of War. It is about Ukrainian athletes who are struggling to try to train while the war is going on all around them. We'll be talking with director Gabriel Veras about how he made this film. Really interesting way that a documentary got made, to be sure. So join us for that. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep the flame alive.